Hey, it looks like I have to do a fast forward here to make this video work properly. So this was the first 15 minutes that you just got. Welcome again. My name's Nora Demers, talking to you about my educational autobiography. The landscape, the environment around me was very important to who I was. Traveling had a lot to do with who I have become. I started going to Yellowstone National Park when I was 16 years old after my sister Ann went there for the summer and got a job in the park. So I went up the next year, just got on the Greyhound bus, got off in Gardner, Montana, and got a job there for the summer and did that for about 3 different summers. I would go out for the summer and not make it back for the fall semester. But would finally eventually make it back for spring semester. So it took me about 4 years to get the first 2 years of community college done. As I said, my dad was an electrical engineer working at a community college so that his kids could get a college education for $1 per credit hour. That lower picture there is the Yellowstone River and Boiling River. It's at the 45th parallel between Gardner and Mammoth Hot Springs. Incredibly beautiful place. I remember sitting in the hot springs in the night with the snow coming down and elk looking at us. This close up is what Mammoth Hot Springs looks like. That's where I worked for the first year or two when I was in Yellowstone. And then I ended up working in Gardner, Montana, where I met the man who was to become my husband. So back up a little bit, one of those trips home from Yellowstone, I came to find that my parents were divorcing and my mom had moved around the block. About 15 years later, my sister told me that the reason that happened was because she had finally come out that my father had sexually abused her, which had led to the breakup. But that's when I was diagnosed with manic depression. Jumping forward a little bit here, this is 20 to 22 years old, where my husband and I converted a school bus in Missouri and took that school bus to Oregon and the Pacific Northwest. So let me see if I can catch us up here. Things were a little bit out of order there. Sorry about that. So I'm finally ready for higher education after our time in Yellowstone National Park and Southern California. I got my undergraduate degree at the University of Missouri, Rolla. Started with some research in Professor Ron Frank's lab doing restriction mapping and gene sequencing, looking for soybean gene seed colors, and then also did some research again with the environment about toxicity of lead. We use the model organism, in this case, Daphnia or the sea monkeys. So another big culture shift was going from, Leesburg, Cuba, Missouri, which was this, back country area. And then I'd go to school 35 miles down the road and be living in higher education. So it was quite a culture clash. If you move forward from there, after I got my bachelor's degree, we started to say, what now? So my plan was to teach at the high school level in Missouri, but they changed the laws to make the teacher responsible. I thought that was inappropriate. It did not fit with my life paradigm. So I decided I needed to get a PhD to teach students that wanted to learn. That's one of the assumptions I work from, and I tell the students in my classroom, even though I recognize that it may not always be the case. So on the right-hand side, you can see the school bus here that we bought from a church, took out the seats, scraped up the gum, turned it into our house, and headed out to Newport, Oregon. So you might ask, why Newport, Oregon and the Hatfield Marine Science Center? Well, primarily because Newport is the Dungeness crab capital of the world. We looked all up and down the West Coast to find out where we might want to live next, and found the Dungeness crab capital of the world and that there was a Hatfield Marine Science Center there. So we went to Oregon looking for a graduate degree. So I ended up getting an interview at the end of the day with a man named Chris Bain. The only reason he interviewed me was he saw on my resume that I had spent a year in England. He's British, so there was the connection. I say that so that you know how much chance plays a role in things and how you never know what important little thing might make a difference. So most of his work was on schistosomiasis, and he also had some interest in traumatic stress response. His son had died in a motorcycle accident. So he gave me two parameters to work within, that the research must be about an innate immunity and would use rainbow trout as the model organism. So my hypothesis was that the fight or flight response must be good for us to help us withstand assault. And the hypothesis I attempted to falsify was that there would be increases of plasma proteins in our bloodstream that would help us fight against infection. And these would be acute increases within just seconds or minutes of stress. Again, rainbow trout's the model organism, but we're all animals and the responses are the same in all of us. Showed increases of 5 plasma proteins within 10 minutes of stress. Several of those had returned to resting level by 20 minutes. Some of the earliest and only research being done on such an acute, immediate response to stress within minutes, seconds, rather than hours or days later, which is most stress. So the idea that acute stress that we can escape from is good for us, unlike chronic, inescapable stress, which it seems like many of us put ourselves through when we study all day and don't sleep and those sorts of things. So I also started something I've continued to this day, bringing together people for conferences. I helped organize the biology graduate student conferences at the Hatfield Marine Science Center for several years. My girlfriend was an artist. I would tell her what was in my head and she would draw it for me. So you can see the DNA double helix in blue on the left, a tree, cypress tree in Newport, Oregon in the middle, where she drew in the different organisms. That's an adenovirus, the spaceship in the middle. You can see all the animals in the roots of the trunk and in the trees. So just showing the interrelationship of life, as does the one in the bottom, where you see the sea turtle with the world on his back within an atom. So these are some of the cars that we've lived in over the years, living on wheels. We spent about 11 years living on wheels, starting in a Plymouth Fury. Then we bought that Lightning Amen van in Santa Maria, California, when we were running a donut shop. Stepped up to the 1956 step van, which we lived in for a couple years until we moved back to Missouri. Lived in a cabin in Missouri that my grandmother had built, and then took off from there by buying that bus and driving it out to Oregon. So moving on, try to finish up at Florida Gulf Coast University. I came in 1997, the year the university opened. Came primarily because of the commitment to environmental sustainability, and felt that that was really important and a place that I wanted to spend my life teaching. So University Colloquium with all these field trips is one of my favorite experiences at FGCU. I've done a number of service learning projects, gopher tortoise habitat restoration, as well as some work in San Carlos Park trying to improve our drainage district. Some of the research that I'm working at now is all the biology majors at FGCU are required to do senior research, and I've got a few main themes going. One of them is big data analysis. So there's a sea turtle nesting data set from Collier County, where we're looking through that data, combing through it to see relationships between nesting and hatching success compared to renourishments and other changes over time, as well as looking at predation. Also spending a lot of time with about 20 students for the past few years looking at chemicals in aquatic environments and how they are messing with our endocrine system using the model organism of Gambusia, the mosquito fish. To do that, it turns out that this mosquito fish is becoming masculinized, the females, in a number of locations. It's a very readily visible morphological feature. Their anal fin gets extended to look like a gonadopodium of the male. These mosquito fish give live birth. Super neat story. If you're interested, there's plenty about it outside my office door, and I'd be happy to talk to you further. Endocrine disruptors are pesticides, personal care products, medications, pharmaceuticals, and plasticizers. So I do try to spend a lot of my time teaching people that all these plastics that they're ingesting and these chemicals that they're bathing in are causing profound effects on all living organisms, including humans. I've also been doing some research with gopher tortoise. The top one is gopher tortoise relocation data for the past 10 years from another big data set, Fish and Wildlife Commission. And on the bottom there is some gopher tortoise research about parasites at Naples Preserve, a few other similar projects. I also sponsor student research on projects that they're interested in of their own design. So I also do photography, and we do a lot of traveling with our RV. I like orchids. Benign neglect works very well. We have dogs in our life. Buster Brown and Twiggy are the most recent ones, and my favorite by far was Gizmo. She died a few years ago. She's a long-haired Chihuahua. So I think it's probably worthwhile to say my life has been framed by a really profound love for education within the confines of a regular classroom, as Dewey's, experiential education, that formal part that's happening in the classroom, but as well as all of these travels and experiences that I've had in my life up until now. You can see the theme of David Orr talks about all experiences be environmental education by what is taught or what is not taught. And you can see that I was taught and learned from a very young age that the environment is important and it is in danger. The final comment I'd like to make is about Richard Louve's book, Lost Child in the Woods and Nature Deficit Disorder. I think, as you can see from the travels that I've shown you, I didn't have too much problem in nature. I loved being in nature and was able to spend a lot of time in nature. And that's probably the case until I started, my formal job as an adult, being a professor at a university, where I spend so many of my hours in the classroom and in my office looking at a computer screen. And it's probably now more than ever that I have nature deficit disorder. I might go into the office and into work at 8 a.m. and not get out until 5, and never having stepped outdoors for that entire time. And maybe have a peek out the window, but not going outside. So more recently, I'd say I am experiencing nature deficit disorder. So I hope that this helped give you a feel for what I mean by an educational autobiography, focusing on the environment, what I've learned, who I am, the importance of science and model organisms, structure-function relationships. And I thank you very much for your time, and I look forward to seeing you in classes.